Good afternoon. Welcome to today's PSIA Wednesday afternoon event. I'm delighted to welcome you all here, and for those who are joining us online, delighted to welcome you as well. We have yet another timely topic to discuss today. This time it relates, of course, to what's been happening in Myanmar since the return to full military rule following the coup d'etat this past February. We're very pleased that this event today has been organized in collaboration with Human Rights Watch. We're also pleased that we have not one, not two, but three Burmese nationals who are part of today's panel, which obviously is important for us to have that diversity. Let me welcome back Alex Ankant, who is a Sciences Po graduate from a few years ago. Phil Robertson, who is from Human Rights Watch. Wei Wei Nu, who joins us remotely. Hopefully she's on the screen somewhere in your view. And the fourth panelist, Tom Andrews, will be joining a little bit later, so you will see him eventually. He's not yet here with us. Also to finally, let me thank very much Mimi Mang Trenton, who some of you will know is an academic advisor at PSIA for the Masters in International Governance and Diplomacy. I wish you all a very great event, and hand over immediately to Mimi, who will moderate the event and will introduce both the topic and, of course, the speakers more fully. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mark. Can everyone hear me? Yeah? Good? Great. Well, welcome, everyone. Thank you for being here today, and thank you very much, Mark, for the introduction. Before we start, I would like to thank Human Rights Watch for actually initiating the topic of this event, and especially to Professor Elodie Andro, who is one of our professors from PSIA. And we're very grateful for your suggestion as well as your help, because that was indispensable. And I would like to also warmly welcome all our panelists today, because it's quite exciting for me. As Mark mentioned, I am a Burmese born, so the topic is quite close to home for me as well, okay? And before I start and introduce you to the panelists, I wanted to put a little bit of context into the situation in Myanmar. So as you may know, on February 1st, 2021, this is when the coup d'etat happened, and when the democratically elected members of the ruling party, which was the National League for Democracy, the members were forcefully removed from office by the military, and the military took control of the power, okay? And since the coup d'etat, you have probably seen that millions of civilians have been on the street demonstrating peacefully to asking for return of the democratically elected civil government. Not military, but civil government. This is what they're asking for, okay? However, the response from the military was brutal. It has been reported that since the coup d'etat, over 1,000 civilians have been killed by the military. Many of them are children, and there is no accountability for it. And this is not the only time it has happened. So Human Rights Watch, together with United Nations and a few other nations, have declared the situation has amounted to crimes of humanity, okay? So when we are talking, what we are here today, or what we want to talk about today, is how to stop impunity by the military of Myanmar military. And this is the discussion of the topic. And Myanmar is a small country, as you know, but with very rich natural resources. However, there's very little attention from the international community. And some international communities, such as the United Nations, have intervened or attempted to intervene, and yet it has failed thus far. And what we need now is to really discuss on new measures and new ideas and interventions. And this is why we are here today. And again, I thank Human Rights Watch for bringing up the topic, as well as all our discussants for today. So the whole purpose of us being here is to listen to the experiences of our panelists, their views, and their recommendations, okay? So I'm very happy to present to you all our panelists, but to start with Mr. Phil Robertson. As Mark mentioned, he's the Deputy Director of Human Rights Watch Asia Division. Phil has been a specialist of Myanmar for almost 30 years, and he has been working with governmental and UN agency on human rights advocacy for many years. So he comes with many experience. And then online, we have Weiwei Nu joining us from the United States. Weiwei, were you able to say something? Maybe just to say hi, just to test whether you're able to connect to us.
Hello, everyone. Hi, I'm Mimi. Nice to meet you all.
So everyone can hear Weiwei? Yeah? Great. So Weiwei actually is a young human rights advocate. She is actually former political prisoner and the founder and executive director of Women Peace Network in Myanmar. For such a young age, she has done incredible work for human rights for Myanmar people, not only for the Rohingya, but all different ethnic minorities. And you will see she has a wealth of information that she is able to share, and also for recommendation. And then, as Mark introduced, with us on site, we have Alex Anka, who is actually a young politician as well, political advocate, and who ran for 2019 Yangon development elections, yes, and who was actually the youngest of such candidates ever in Myanmar, in any elections in Myanmar. And of course, we're also very proud, as Mark said, because he is one of our alumni. So he did his undergrad in La Havre campus and the graduate studies at the Urban School. So very welcome, Alex.
Thank you.
And not least, actually, last but not least, Mr. Tom Andrews, who will be joining us at around 6 o'clock because he has some important meeting that he had to attend prior to this event. He is our UN Special Rapporteur for human rights situation in Myanmar. So he's actually been on the ground as well as all the rest of the panelists. And Tom has his own consulting practice, working with parliamentary and human rights advocates to actually obtain different policies and to work on advocacies. And Tom also served as the General Secretary of the Nobel Peace Laureate Campaign for Aung San Suu Kyi in 2001. So we are here until around 7 o'clock in this amphi. And the first thing is we're going to hear from the presenters, their views, their experience, and their recommendations. And then we're going to give the floor to you. We want to hear your questions, your feedback, as well as your recommendations, because I'm sure you have many to share. And we're very happy to be discussing with you directly as well. So without further ado, I would like to give the floor to Phil Robertson. Thank you.
Good afternoon, and thank you for inviting me to be with you here today in Paris. First of all, let me thank Mark and Mimi for their kind introductions. And let me say that on behalf of Human Rights Watch, I want to thank also Science Po for making this very important stage available to talk about an issue that's near and dear to my heart, Burma. This collaboration between academia and activists is precisely the sort of thing that Human Rights Watch values. And speaking on behalf of the Human Rights Watch France office, which is of course sitting right here in the front row, I want to thank you for joining us. There's a number of points I want to make over just a few moments, and I think we can get into a lot of these issues in the question and answer session. But I've been working on Burma since 1993, which shows that my gray hair is well earned. And I must say that these past 9 months have been a very unwelcome case of deja vu. And that is, I think, the first point, that the people of Burma, this has been an unmitigated human rights disaster, and it's really their worst nightmare come true. As an unapologetic military, or the Tatmadaw as it's known, hauls the country back to an authoritarian past that most people in Burma believed had truly ended with the election of Aung San Suu Kyi and the National League for Democracy in 2015 in a landslide, and again in November 2020 in an even bigger landslide. I and many others believe that the clear-cut results of that second election, that November 2020 election, meant that there was no going back to the past, no going back to military rule. The argument, which was not just shared by us, but by diplomats, the UN, and others, was that there's too much to risk in terms of economic development, in terms of foreign investment, relationships with the UN and other governments, and many other connections that had been built with the outside world during the over 10 years of transition from absolute military rule, which prevailed until 2011. And we didn't believe that the Myanmar military would seize power because they realized it would drive the country to the edge of the cliff. We clearly underestimated Senior General Min Aung Hlaing and the Tatmadaw, who, as Mimi mentioned, have committed crimes against humanity against the Burmese people since the military coup. Human Rights Watch actually made that determination on July 31st at the 6-month mark of the coup, that the offenses of the Burmese junta against those opposed to the military coup constituted a widespread and systematic attack against the population and constituted crimes against humanity. And the nature of that government response, that was broad-based, consistent, that it reflects government policy. This is not just individual commanders or individual police unit leaders making decisions. It's not individual security personnel. This is state policy. And those apparent crimes include murder, enforced disappearance, torture, rape, and other sexual violence, severe deprivation of liberty, and other inhumane acts causing great suffering. So, deja vu, we're now back to what we saw before during the military years. Nighttime raids, military police hauling people away without any information to their relatives about where they're taken. No access to family members or lawyers. There are hundreds now of these cases of enforced disappearance. The Assistance Association for Political Prisoners, or AAPP, which is trying to keep track of this, says that of yesterday, over 9,200 people have been arrested. And there's another 1,900 plus people who are fleeing arrest warrants against them. For those in custody, systematic torture has returned, along with deaths in custody. We've also seen another deja vu moment. Military shootings on the street in Burma have returned. Now on a scale that actually dwarfs the killings that took place in 1988 and 2007, which were previous uprisings. Again, AAPP says that over 1,200 people have been killed. This is not just in big cities, but also in many provincial towns. Media censorship is backed. There's an effort by the military to control all information. They've shut down many news media outlets. They've been harassing and arresting journalists. They've cut off the satellite feeds. And there's been a general effort to suppress information. Dozens of journalists are on the run, either fleeing to ethnic-controlled areas on the borders or across the border to Thailand or India, where they're trying to operate. And there's been a return to what characterized Burma when I was going there before I got banned in the 1990s, an all-pervasive fear of the authorities, combined with a breakdown in trust because of police and military informers. The second point I would make is that the situation is likely to get worse rather than better. We're now currently seeing the Tatmadaw attack civilian targets and ethnic enclaves with columns of troops backed by air power. We've seen helicopter and jet attacks. These are things primarily provided by Russia, have been hit churches, schools, and villages in Karen and Karenni states, Kachin and Shan states in the north. We see again the Tatmadaw employing what is known as the Four Cuts campaign, which is to cut insurgents off from food, funds, information, and new recruits, basically by systematically harassing, capturing, and killing civilians in targeted areas. And now we're seeing warning bells being sounded as the monsoon season comes to an end in Myanmar, that significant troop movements are being seen going to Chin State and Sagaing Division, which are two areas where we have seen significant resistance by ordinary people, by militias, by village groups, in areas that previously, before February 2021, were not considered militant areas, and that there will be a dry season offensive against these groups, as known as People's Defense Force groups. And we expect that this will likely result in massive rights abuses against civilians. Point number 3, and this is quite different, is that there is a systematic resistance to these actions by the military. The Burmese people are fighting in various ways every day. There's been a national resistance across the country, from cities to rural areas, across ethnic states and divisions. This is the largest, most prolonged, and systematic resistance to military rule in modern Burmese history. Millions protested during the first 6 weeks after the military coup, before the police and military crackdowns made it too dangerous to do so. But we still see daily flash mobs. We see people in rural villages holding up signs. We see monks in monasteries demanding justice. We see flash mobs in cities still happening. There have been economic boycotts organized by the civil disobedience movement, and they've continued. And this has been essentially the use of mass strike tactics to basically withhold labor, withhold economic support from the military and from the government. And now there's a massive tug of war going on between the people of Burma, embodied in the CDM as it's known, which is using these mass strike tactics to try to shut down the economy and try to make the country ungovernable, versus a military which is trying to use brute force to enforce its will and hold on to power. More recently, we've seen the rise of People's Defense Forces, which are local groups, militia. They're shadowy, they're composed of local people. They're in the cities and the rural areas. There are over 300 of them now, according to the National Unity Government Defense Ministry. This is the opposition government that has come up in both in exile and inside the country. And we're seeing daily attacks on military, police, and informer networks against people in political parties that are believed to be associated with the military. And we're also seeing use of sabotage tactics, so bombing of military-owned cell phone towers, IEDs in major cities. Every day in the commercial capital, Yangon, between 4 to 6 IEDs go off in front of various different government offices. And all this is happening under conditions where we have less information coming out, because we've seen blocks on the independent media as well as restrictions on mobile internet. For the Burmese people before 2011, virtually no one had internet. Virtually no one had mobile phones. And all of a sudden, this became open, and it was this mobile phone connected to the internet that really became the way that people learned about the world. Now they've shut this down. And so the first 6 weeks to 2 months, we saw a flood of photos about brutality. We saw a flood of photos about protests. We saw videos. All that has been shut down. The junta is trying to make it much more difficult to communicate and send out information to the outside world. The fourth key point, I would say, is that the international community is failing Burma. There's really a divide that is opening between the views of the Burmese people, who see an urgency to respond to this rapid escalation of violence and conflict in the country, versus the international community, which is dragging its feet and coming up short with solutions. Early anguished cries heard from the Burmese people about the responsibility to protect doctrine and invoking that doctrine, and asking how many people needed to die before the UN acts, have now given way to a recognition by many Burmese that they need to fight on against the military junta alone. What we need actually in Burma is strong, targeted sanctions hitting economic interests of the military and its two conglomerates, the Union of Myanmar Economic Holdings and the Myanmar Economic Corporation, and their business partners. We also need a global arms embargo on the sale of arms and dual-use technologies to the junta. But at every step, those things are not being fulfilled. Action is being blocked at the UN Security Council by threats from veto-wielding members China and Russia. China and Russia, by the way, are of course the number 1 and 2 arms sellers to the Myanmar military. The UK, which is a penholder for the UN Security Council resolutions on Burma, is frozen by those threats, unwilling to move to even draft a resolution and force action. And France, frankly, is hiding behind that in actions that are, frankly, not really worthy of a permanent Security Council member. So far, we've only had the US, the UK, Canada, and the EU have adopted targeted sanctions, but these don't include the most important sector, oil and gas. In fact, because France is effectively blocking UN sanctions on that sector. And I'll give you a one-word reason why. Total. While some sectors that do profit the junta, like gems and timber, have been hit, they don't amount to what the energy sector provides in terms of resources to that military junta. And many other countries, major countries like Australia, Japan, South Korea, India, and others, are nowhere to be seen when we even talk about pressuring the junta. All those countries have sort of hidden behind the weakest link in the chain, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, claiming that they want to support ASEAN centrality in dealing with the crisis in Burma. But ASEAN is also totally split between two sides, which explains why it took for them up to 6 months to come up with a special envoy that was supposed to press all sides on a 5-point consensus document agreed in April with the military junta. Now, we've recently seen new developments in ASEAN. We can talk about those during the question and answer session. But, it's only because the Burmese military has been so unwilling to act that ASEAN has finally been forced to do something by disinviting Junta Supremo Senior General Min Aung Hlaing to attend the ASEAN Leaders Summit, which actually was going on yesterday and today. This is a big step for ASEAN, but no one believes that when push comes to shove, they will continue to pressure Burma. In fact, I think Burma was shocked by ASEAN's action, because usually ASEAN will defend their member states no matter what. It just shows how far the Burmese junta has gone in trying to pursue its single-minded agenda to control the people of Burma. And this leaves Joe Biden and his administration as being the sort of sole champion of trying to do more on Burma. Burma is frankly the last bipartisan issue still alive in Washington, D.C., the thing that the Democrats and the Republicans can still agree upon. But one country, no matter how big, is not enough to turn the tide. So we are now facing a situation where without concerted action by the international community, Burma is going to continue to slide deeper into chaos, deeper into violence, deeper into desperation, humanitarian deprivation, and will become a major problem not only for the people of Burma, but also for the region in Southeast Asia where it's located. So with that, thank you very much, and I look forward to hearing the other panelists.
Great, thank you very much, Phil. And now I'll give the microphone to Wei Wei Nu. Thank you, Wei Wei.
Thank you very much, Ma'am Mimi, and for your kind introductions. So I'm not gonna repeat what Phil has already said. I would like to bring you to a more narrow questions around the accountability and ending impunity. And we all know that the military coup attempted, we still call it attempted coup because military hasn't been able to consolidate their power yet and have control over the country. So this attempted coup in this the February was only possible due to the failure to hold the Myanmar military accountable. The decades-long impunity emboldened the military to commit the mass atrocity crimes against ethnic minorities, including genocide against Rohingya, and then stage the coup. Now continue to commit atrocity crimes against the entire country, as Phil has described. I'd like to bring you back to the or I guess pre-2010 or 2011 or pre-political opening. I think it was post-Nargis and Saffron revolutions in 2007. There was a movement to hold the military leader accountable. There was a campaign on commissions of inquiry. I think Phil will remember more than me. I was in the prison, so I don't obviously know the movement, but I have heard work since my release from the jail in 2012, since I've been working on the protections of human rights and accountability issues, as I am told by many of my friends and colleagues about these stories. And so there was a campaign on holding Burmese military leaders accountable at that time. And the campaign was it was the campaign to put Burma on UN Security Council agenda, and was launched in I think it was launched in 2005 with the report called "Threat to Peace: A Call for UN Security Council to Act in Burma," was published by Desmond Tutu and Bob Havel. And this was I was told that this was successful, with the aim to have this UI and which would eventually result the UN Security Council a referral of Burma to ICC. In parallel with that campaign by the international human rights organizations and Burmese campaigners, there was a regional campaign also to deny Burma the ASEAN chair in 2006. It was also the main reason that the ASEAN Inter-Parliamentary Caucus for Democracy in Myanmar was formed in 2004. So there was like very active campaign on holding the Burmese leaders, military leaders accountable. However, and there was also some signal and interest by the member states at the United Nations for the COI. However, after 2010 elections and 2011, the momentum, we lost the momentum, and no countries or the campaigner shows interest to continue this effort. And domestically inside Myanmar, there was no discussions about the transitional justice as a compromise, especially from the Aung San Suu Kyi leadership as a compromise for the political transitions and building national reconciliations and so on. So I think that was I'm sharing this because 2 points I would like to bring here. One, I think that was the mistake that we didn't have a transitional justice processes, and we weren't able to hold the military leaders accountable at that time. At the same time, I'm sharing that there was a effort, and that was quite successful, and we can now perhaps adapt some of those strategy from those days. But this shows the histories of Burmese historical brutalities and human rights violations of Burmese military leaders that has been lacked holding accountability. So now after the coup, many of us actually trying to, not after the coup, like even before the coup, like people like us have been advocating for the justice and accountability. We have somehow managed to get into UN fact-finding missions, and now we have the IIMM, United Nations independent investigations on Myanmar, independent investigative mechanisms on Myanmar. I see this as a hope, and perhaps before I'm going back to the domestic situations, I think I will just address this here. I think the IIMM is our hope, and we are aware that they are collecting documents, the evidences, and preparing case file for the future prosecutions, and all of us are aware of it. And I think we have to be able to push this to set up a future, future court, or to push for some sort of prosecutions through the UN Security Council referral, or ad hoc establishment of an ad hoc tribunal, or even encourage states to use this to collaborate with the IIMM for perhaps for universal jurisdictions and other processes. So maybe put in some emphasis on the effort by the IIMM will be worth trying. Equipping them and pushing the agenda to move forward will be I think worth trying. So I think as we since the coup, there has been many groups advocating to end the violence in Myanmar, and many people to push for the political solutions. But sometimes we lost track of the proper strategy, I guess. For me, the failure, the disaster, human rights and humanitarian disaster in Myanmar is only possible, as I said, because of the impunity. We definitely need to pay a strong emphasis on the accountability and ending impunity in Myanmar. It was difficult before the coup. Domestically, we didn't have enough support for the accountability by the public or by the civilians government. But after the coup, since the public, the Burmese majority have seen the brutalities of the military against all people in Myanmar, there is a strong support for the accountability and justice from the people, from the public. And public consciousness has been the highest. I would say in the history, there has been more and more solidarity among the different ethnic communities, and solidarity, empathy for even for the Rohingya, where the Rohingya community has been marginalized and treated as outsiders, alien for for the past 10 years. Due to the military's propaganda and all the violence that happens. But now we are seeing more and more support and sympathy, and even the Gen Zs are taking social media to apologize for dismissing the plight of the minorities, including the Rohingya. And women from various organizations and ethnic backgrounds took to the street to stand with their Rohingya sisters. And also the National Unity government is working towards building a federal democratic Myanmar and taking steps to address the past abuses against the Rohingya. So, but before going back to the questions of impunity, I think if it is also important that for the National Unity government to acknowledge the atrocity committed against the Rohingya as genocide, as they are also calling for the justice and accountability for the military, and also recognize the Rohingya as an ethnic nationality entitled to citizenship and other collective and individual rights, because these are some of the critical political questions and political crises beyond accountability when it's come to the Rohingya. And but like I said earlier, the support for the justice and accountability is very high domestically. So I think we have to use this as an opportunity, both addressing both preparing for the transitional justice processes, as well as immediately trying to hold the military leaders accountable under the international at the international level, since the Burmese judiciary and justice systems is failed, and it's not obviously it's extremely weak, lack independence, impartiality, no rule of law at all. So since we cannot rely on the domestic justice system at all, we don't know until we're able to fix it in the future, once we win the revolution. For now, it is crucial that we put all the efforts to bring Burmese, the military leaders, to justice. And for me, the ending impunity and accountability is a key to Burma's future, beyond political solutions. Without justice, our democracy, even in the future, will not be able to survive, as we have witnessed already. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Wei Nu. Thank you, Wei Nu. And I'll give the microphone, actually, to Alex Songkhang.
Thank you, Mimi, and pleasure to be invited back here again after graduating from here about 6 years ago. Although I wish it was a better subject that we were talking about today, it is still nonetheless a very clear reminder that we should be using our freedom to promote the freedom of others. I'd like to start off by saying that a little bit about my story of returning back to Myanmar in 2016. This was right fresh after the winning of the elections in 2015, and this was pretty much a country of hope at that time. And I'm sure many of my colleagues in the development world and in the human rights world will have felt the same, that things were about to look positive. That did not turn out that way, not just on February 1st, but in the years following 2016, with the disappointments that I'm sure Mamai Wuinu has already convinced you of, the struggles of an entire group of people that has been hurt by injustice before the entire country falls alongside it. My first speaker here mentioned that the coup was a deja vu for many people, and in some sense yes, and in some sense no. Burma is a classic story, if anything, of well repeated, to the point that when I was coming to school, most people knew about Burma through movies, even as this backwater country that was isolated and just coming out to the international world. And indeed, yes, but in some ways, no. This is not like the previous times, because we are not facing the same problems as previous times. We are, in fact, facing a worse problem, if you will. And it is worse because not just of the brutality, and just to give you ideas of that brutality, there's been infants as young as, there's a 4-year-old, for example, who passed her 5th birthday in prison. And this 4-year-old was given a 3-year sentence for inciting, disturbance. There's been a 14-month-old that was shot mistakenly, apparently, for having been confused as a weapon, although this 14-month-old was sitting in her own father's lap in home. And so this level of brutality, and this level of brutality, certainly in this age, when information and reports about it are going internationally and to the eyes and ears of not just organizations like Human Rights Watch, but also to international governments even, is certainly very brazen, if you will. At least in the old days, people had some sort of, restraint. Now all restraints are off. There's nothing left on the table to be discussed. And so this generation of protesters are actually even younger than me, and probably even younger than you. And unfortunately, not just protesters, but have also become armed resistance warriors simply because of a lack of choice. Now, when I said that, this is no longer a deja vu, this is not the repeat of history, but a writing of a new history, well, the military has actually done this a favor or a disfavor to their own selves in their single-minded stupidity by arresting all the older political leaders and thereby cutting off old guards. And what happens is that it opens the field for emergence of a new wave of people who are not just more creative and innovative and more brave, if you will, and direct in their resistance, but also are very well aware that if they do not resist, then they will face the same fate that has plagued Burma for many generations before. And so, in the simplest words for you, it means that this fight is no longer about the restoration of Aung San Suu Kyi to power. Many of you here will have known about Burma through her. And in fact, my classmates 6 years ago were also similarly through this lenses. Burma today is very much united against a common enemy, because if anything, the last 70 years since our independence has taught us that the only hindrance to our path to success and democracy and to development and to justice is really just one group of individuals who all graduate from the same school, one group of individuals who are all men, and who are, in the eyes of people now, not only leeching off of the country's economy, because they do not promote to the economy, but rather, not just acting as the prison wardens, if you will, but also the benefactors of this economy. And that there is no amount of negotiation or compromise that they will be okay with. I mentioned compromise because for many political scientists and for many students here, and certainly what I was taught as well, was always to find the middle ground, and or if you will, the middle line, and to meet in the middle, as always. That's very hard for people these days in Myanmar to understand or to to even bear. What people forget is that the last 10 years of democracy, or quote-unquote democracy, if you will, or at least more freedom, and since 2010 to 11, were that middle line. We were in that middle ground. And that middle ground was not negotiated by us, but rather the military's own compromise. They set those rules themselves. Now, just as a quick reminder of what those rules were, it meant that 25% of parliament was unavailable to the people, and by that I mean that 25% was automatically taken by military members in military attire. So again, a very clear sign of their brazen will, if you will, to be physically present. Many ministries, 3 key ministries, were under the control of the military: the Ministry of Defense, Border Affairs, and Home Affairs. So in that way, they were still the wardens of that country, if you will. The military also had an appointed vice president, and not just that, the military had a constitutional right to declare a coup d'etat, or there was a state of emergency at any time that they wish, without the need to consult anybody. The commander-in-chief of the military was also not the civilian elected president, but rather the head of the military himself. Now, given all these facts of the compromise that we have lived for the last 10 years, we still managed to thrive under this last 10 years. The internet was really one of the biggest changes that happened to Myanmar, and I'll give another quick facts of how much this has changed, because for paddy farmers and rural villagers to coming from nothing, coming from barely having a TV that half of the village would crowd around to watch, to suddenly having Chinese-made mobile phones that gave instant access to Facebook and to the rest of the world through that portal, meant that there was no going back, because once somebody starts to see the world, there's really no taking back. So the younger generation of this day, who are now, as I speak, 14, 15, and 16, are even much more educated than we would think. There are people who are experts in cryptocurrency, for example, and there are people who are experts in VPNs to circumvent military protocols, and there are experts in whatever it is field that you would say. And certainly, yes, a growing number of experts in civilian resistance. With all that being said, the international community, my message here, and certainly for everybody here, is to understand really that once they themselves have set that middle ground, and the military themselves have decided to push past this line, then it becomes a black and white. And the line between black and white is going to be drawn in black, because you need to draw this line. And so this has given us a very difficult lesson, if you will, to realize that we need to not only remove the military completely, that there is no end game in which they come out alive, if you will. Alive as in present in the political sphere, alive as in present in our government sphere. And so we really cannot tolerate not just 25, not even 5%, not even 1% anymore. And simply because they have broken their own promise, if you will. Now, I'll be very interested to open up questions later on, but on this topic of ending impunity for people who first have not broken this once, not just twice, but have also created many crimes against humanity that are, again, widely available and reported to the world and continue to do so. The question here is, it is not that the Burmese people do not have the answers of ending impunity. Rather, it is that those answers are inconvenient and very unfavorable to the eyes and ears of the international community. There is no other country that really demands for an international invasion or an occupation for the United Nations Security Council. This is very rare. We know what the situation is like in Iraq and Afghanistan and everywhere. And yet we ask for international force to occupy us because it is our own military that is against us. And so the question is that, yes, we can end that impunity, but would you like to do that? Would you be okay with hearing that answer? And is it difficult for you, or too difficult for you, to do that at your positions in organizations? Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Alex. Thank you very much, Alex. And now I would like to give the microphone to Tom Andrews. Tom, are you able to?
Thank you, Mimi. Can you hear me? Am I coming through?
Great. Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. All right. Great. Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me to participate in this forum, and to join these very distinguished panelists who are so committed to human rights and justice and the people of Myanmar. It truly is an honor to join them today, and it is very, very important to be talking about this question: how do we end Tatmadaw impunity? And as the Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights in Myanmar, let me tell you what I've told the General Assembly of the United Nations and the Human Rights Council in Geneva, that we need a course correction as an international community, as a United Nation. We are failing the people of Myanmar, and we have to fundamentally reassess the way the international community is responding to this crisis and make the proper course correction, because staying the course is not going to end impunity. It is not going to end this nightmare. It is not going to end the Tatmadaw holding an entire nation hostage. So we have to ask these difficult but very important fundamental questions. There are 6 things that I think that are particularly important for the international community to be paying attention to. First is the importance of reducing access to revenue by the junta. There are 3 things that the junta needs from the international community. It needs money, it needs weapons, and it needs legitimacy. And we can do a lot more in all 3 of those areas. But starting with revenue, the people of Myanmar have established what truly are citizen sanctions on the military. They are boycotting anything and everything that is connected to, directly or indirectly, the military. They have established a system of withdrawal of taxes. They're withholding taxes. They're withholding payment of utility bills. And these citizen sanctions, these collective steps that are being taken by the people of Myanmar to deny the junta the revenue that it needs, is costing them, it's an estimated $1 billion in revenue. And what they're asking us to do as an international community is to join them, to support them, to engage with them. And that means establishing tough, focused, targeted sanctions that can have the greatest impact in reducing the revenue that the junta needs. Now, the junta prides itself in having a very large, well-equipped military. And indeed, it is one of the largest militaries in the region, indeed the world. But what they see as a strength is also a weakness, because it takes significant revenue to finance that army, to supply them, to house them, to support them. And so it is a vulnerability that we should be seizing much more effectively than we're seizing them right now. Now, ideally, the United Nations Security Council would establish a global sanctions regime, as well as referring the junta to the International Criminal Court. That is unlikely to happen, at least anytime soon. So in the meantime, I think it's extremely important for countries who are willing to take this kind of action and establish sanctions to coordinate, get together, build a coalition of nations who are willing to do so, and establish targeted, unified sanctions that target those areas of the finances of the junta that are most vulnerable and can most seriously weaken it. We have yet to see the kind of sanctions, the degree of sanctions, nor the coordination of sanctions that we need to be seeing. The second thing is, of course, weapons. And I'm happy to say that there are now fewer and fewer nations that are providing the junta with weapons, but nonetheless, there is still weapons being and dual-use technology flowing to the junta. It needs to be stopped. The UN General Assembly passed a resolution that called upon nations to work to stop the flow of weapons to the military junta. Not a single member of the UN Security Council voted against that resolution. Therefore, I believe that the Security Council should establish a arms embargo on the military junta, that it should at least be put before the Security Council. It should be debated and it should be voted. Weapons and dual-use technology should be stopped. The denial of legitimacy is also very important. As you know, ASEAN is engaging now in its summit. It has specifically not invited the Min Aung Hlaing, the head of the junta. He is not welcome there. And within 24 hours of that announcement, the military junta announced that they would be releasing thousands of prisoners. This is an immediate impact that this had. Now, let's just put this all in perspective and understand that there were many of those prisoners, after they were released, were re-released. So this is not a panacea, but the fact is that the ASEAN took a step toward denying the junta what it requires of the international community, legitimacy. The National Security Advisor of the United States just yesterday sat down and met with representatives of the national unity government. It's extremely important that nations of the world recognize the national unity government for the resource that it is and provides, and the voice, the legitimate voice that it provides for the people of Myanmar, and that it be engaged accordingly. And any steps that we can be taking in that direction, denying legitimacy to the junta while recognizing and engaging the national unity government, are important steps that need to be taken. More of them need to be taken. Member states that have universal jurisdiction laws should use those laws. There should be cases that should be put forward, adjudication of these horrific crimes that are being committed as we speak. And it's extremely important that the independent investigative mechanism for Myanmar, the IIMM, have the resources it needs, and that it has the tools to continue to collect evidence that can be used in judicial bodies to hold the junta accountable. The fifth step is to dramatically increase humanitarian aid. There is a humanitarian disaster occurring in Myanmar as we speak. The United Nations is projecting that more than half, well over half of the population of Myanmar will be living in poverty in just the next few months. We know that there is a health crisis going on, even as the junta attacks healthcare professionals. We need to get humanitarian aid into that country. We need to use CSOs inside of Myanmar to do so. Cross-border aid is going to be extremely important. Countries tapping the expertise and the resources of the national unity government, extremely important. We need to get aid to where it needs to go, and we need to do so in a much more robust way than we as an international community is doing so. And finally, I think it's, again, let me just reiterate, recognizing the national unity government for the resource that it is, the voice that it provides for the people of Myanmar. The nation is being occupied by a foreign military power. And it is extremely important that we do everything in our power as an international community to support those who are being held hostage. And as I said at the outset, and let me just complete my initial comments here. There is a lot that we can do. There is a lot that we should be doing, and there's a lot that we are not doing as an international community. And I believe it's important for all of us, not just governments, but all of us as citizens, to take it upon ourselves to recognize, look, we are the international community. We all have a personal responsibility when we see an injustice unfolding before our very eyes, to do something. And I think it's critically important for all of us to use our voices, speak to our governments, engage with NGOs and INGOs that are pushing the proverbial envelope, advocating for those who are being held hostage in Myanmar, working with our own governments, with our political parties, with other networks that can have a voice that will be heard by the leaders of the countries in which we live. I think working together as a people, we can and we will prevail upon this horrific nightmare that is being inflicted upon the people of Myanmar. But it's going to take a fundamental change of course for this to come true. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Tom, and thank you very much to all our guests. We've heard many insightful recommendations, and new and old as well. Now we would like to give the microphones, the floor to you for any questions, comments. When you are speaking, could you please introduce yourself by presenting your name, your nationality if you wish, and the program that you are enrolled in at PSIA, and the person that you would like to direct your comment or your question to. Thank you. There are two microphones, one on each side, so you're welcome to go in. Great. Hi. Please go ahead. Yes.
Hello.
Please state your name and your master, and if you wish, nationality, and the question, who you wish to ask the question to.
Hi, my name is Peter. I'm from the United States. I'm in the International Governance and Diplomacy track. My question is for really the whole panel, whoever wants to chime in. And first, thank you all for your time and talking to us. Do you all believe that the U.S. Diplomatic relations in 2012, the reestablishment of relations in 2012, and the EU relaxation of sanctions around the same time, were those actions premature, or were they the right actions at the time? And then from 2012 until the coup, what could the international community have done to prevent the coup from happening, if anything? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Maybe we'll take one more question. There we go.
Hi. My name is Lucia.
Sorry, Tom and Weiwei, are you able to hear? Yes? Okay, great.
Hi, my name is Lucia. I'm doing the Master in Advanced Global
Maybe a little bit louder?
Yes, sorry. My name is Lucia. I'm from Argentina. I'm doing the Master in Advanced Global Studies. My question is mainly for Ma Weiwei Nu, but if anyone else would like to answer, and it's maybe like looking forward, but we're thinking about internet shutdown, and this is not something new. It didn't come from the coup. It was like happening already in Rakhine. It was already happening in Chin State, and elaborating way when you was saying there was a missed opportunity for a transitional justice that incorporates all the minorities. It incorporates the Rohingya, it incorporates the Chin, the Karen. So there is a lot of effort from the national unity government on this, but how do we ensure that in the future, how is the plan in the future going to ensure that this really translates into equal rights for minorities? Thank you.
First question, Phil, did you want to answer?
Yeah, thank you for the questions. On the issue in 2012 of the reestablishment of relations and relaxing of sanctions, it's important to understand the momentum that was generated by the apparent transition, where you had relaxation of censorship, where you had a greater openness, and the international community wanted to believe that this was the real transition, this was the real change, this was finally Tan Shui in particular, but also the military in general stepping back to allow for some other new arrangement. And I think also in terms of relaxing of sanctions, after the election that took place, where you had a partial election and that the NLD won, as I recall, 44 out of 45 seats, giving them basically 7% of the seats in the parliament. there was pressure on by the military and by the Thein Sein administration on Aung San Suu Kyi and others to lift sanctions, and she agreed. And so you had countries around the world who were being told by Aung San Suu Kyi, who many people believed was the legitimate leader of Myanmar, that now it's time to lift the sanctions. And so governments and leaders around the world did. Our view was that there was a couple problems here. First of all, there should have been a set of benchmarks on human rights and reforms, particularly getting rid of some of the undemocratic aspects of the 2008 Constitution, the requirement that 25% of the seats in the parliament be reserved for the military, and the lack of transparency or accountability for military budgets, and a number of other things in the Constitution, that these sort of benchmarks should have been set out. There should have been a sort of quid pro quo that progress would be made on democracy and human rights in Burma, and then sanctions would be slowly lifted, not just sort of give it all away right at the start. But that wasn't our decision. That was the decision of Aung San Suu Kyi and the National League for Democracy leadership at that time. And they took that step, which I think in retrospect was a mistake. But the reality is we were put in a position where there was certainly progress on the ground and people wanted to respond to that. There was also a problem where, accountability for past rights abuses, particularly in Eastern Burma, where there was a discussion about a commission of inquiry that was really proceeding very strongly. 2008, 2009, over 20 governments had agreed that there should be a commission of inquiry at the Human Rights Council about atrocities in Eastern Burma, that these things, all of a sudden, as soon as the transition started, discussions of accountability went right out the window. And so I think in hindsight, we were unable to have a transition that really respected human rights in the way it should have. And that's, I think, a problem that we're continuing to face today. Regarding the second question, I would just say that there's got to be action to fundamentally reform the Citizenship Act of 1982. You cannot base citizenship on ethnicity. I mean, that's a crazy idea. And, for some reason, Myanmar continues to do that, and it has to stop.
Okay, great. Thank you, Phil. Alex, did you want to
Yes,
answer
if I
to
could
that
just also add into that first question on sanctions. My view is that no, those sanctions that were lifted in 2012, yes, they were not lifted in the best way, I agree, that those accountability measures for what we would call collaborators to the military regime, tycoons, if you will, or cronies are a better word, where businessmen that are, having close ties to the military, that have prospered because of their relationship with the military, were one of the biggest benefactors of the lifting of that sanction. Again, this is a classic case where the lowest and most vulnerable people often benefit the least, and then when sanctions are put again, they suffer the most. Classic case in every country, wherever you see. And so, perhaps for the future, whenever there is optimism, the brighter days are ahead, perhaps this is a lesson perhaps that when sanctions are lifted, this is a good case for international businesses to target their investments with quote-unquote righteous leaders. When a business is coming with millions of dollars to a country that has a GDP of roughly 60 billion, you can grow a leader out of nothing. And it is better to do that, because if you are partnering up with the existing big business there, you're probably liking that this person is from the wrong side, if you will. And so this goes across tourism sectors, this goes across construction sectors, this goes across anything that has land and manpower involved and money involved. And so what most businesses do when they try to invest is see who's the top dogs and then try to partner up with these top people because they have a proven track record. No, this is not a proven track record in the sense that it is a fair game. This is rather unfair game where these people have a track record because they've bullied their way into being the top businesses. But sanctions, the lifting of that sanction did help in a way also because SIM cards and the investments for all of those telecoms that came afterwards were beneficial to the people. So sanctions don't work, but lifting them did help the people, is my thing. But the second follow-up question that the gentleman from the US had to prevent the coup, I don't think they could have prevented the coup from 2012 onwards. Frankly, not even the experts and analysts that were watching Burma knew that this was a possibility unless 2 weeks ago. And so I think the international community could have helped probably in January, in the trigger points. Yeah.
If I could, these are really good questions. And
yes, go ahead, Tom.
What I said at the time, I was heading an organization called United to End Genocide, and I was critical of the lifting of these sanctions. And what I recommended, and I continue to recommend, is if you're going to make incremental progress in the right direction, and the changes that we were seeing were indeed incremental, then okay, there should be an incremental lifting of sanctions, but there shouldn't just be a wholesale lifting of sanctions unless significant progress has been made. Now, as we've heard, and it's exactly right, there were important reforms that were put in place, but just think about this. In 2012, there are 130,000 Rohingya people living in what were then called temporary camps of people that were who lost their homes, lost their villages, were attacked mercilessly in Sitwe and ended up in these IDP camps, which I call now internment camps, and they're still there right now. This happened in 2012. Then in 2016, of course, this was when we saw the push for the lifting of sanctions, the elections, and the movement forward. We saw the genocidal attacks against entire villages, hundreds and hundreds of them in northern Rakhine State, and you had a massive loss of life, systematic torture, rape. You have 750,000 Rohingya people heading over the border, running for their lives into Bangladesh, and they're there as we speak in the largest refugee camp in the world. Now, if this does not warrant tough action, sanctions, I don't know what does. And so to be lifting sanctions while these atrocities are occurring before our very lives is, and I think it's, to put it charitably, premature.
Thank you very much, Tom. Wei, did you want to answer to the second question? Thanks.
I would like to answer both questions.
Both questions, perfect.
I agree with what Tom has said, everything what he said. I think one thing that I would like to point out here is that the vast majority of sanctions were lifted after 2015 elections when Aung San Suu Kyi came into power. And it was upon her request, as Phil said. But was that a right decisions? Was the international community make the right decisions? Yes, she had legitimacy. She was elected leader, and she was democratically elected leader. But as they lift the sanctions, the atrocity were occurring, and she did nothing but support the military's actions. Was it the right decision to lift, consider her request, knowing that she is, or her government was more or less complicit to this genocidal attack? And will the international community continue to do similar decisions in other contexts where, let's say, democratically elected government, but committed or being complicit to the international crimes and gross human rights violations? Or are they going to listen to them to support their request that would perhaps there is a justifications for the greater good, right? Democracy. Is it, for me, is it worth it, or is it, how confident you guys were? And now, the coup has clearly shows us that decision was not only premature, but irresponsible. Irresponsible, and somehow even the international governments were enablers in this genocidal attacks. And I think it is for citizens across the world to hold their respective government accountable for their decisions as well. And for me, it was not just premature, it was just irresponsible. And they failed the Rohingya and Kachin and many other ethnic communities where they didn't enjoy the similar freedom that the Burmese in urban in those days enjoyed. And it was fundamentally flawed. And we warned them it won't gonna work, and it didn't work, and it will not work in the future as well. So now any decisions that will impact us, we have to monitor and correct the world and the governments across the world, include as well as leaders in Myanmar or in our countries. So that's what I would like to respond to the first question. And in regard to second question, I think, yes, I acknowledge National Unity Government has now taken one step by issuing a policy positions on Rohingya. That is great. It came after the pressure from the US Congress, and I believe from some other political leaders. As I mentioned earlier in my remark, there has been growing sympathy and understanding, willingness to understand the Rohingya situations by the public, but I am not very confident on the political leaderships. So I would like to see more genuine effort to meaningfully engage with the Rohingya community and include them in the processes that as we build new country. Now these revolutions for many of us, many young people, younger generations, is not just a matter of restorations of civilians government. It's a matter of fighting against all form of dictatorship, all form of injustice and majoritarianism that we have seen. So many young people are sacrificing their future, their life for this kind of future, not just for the restorations of one party's political power or even civilian, just a civilian government. So we have to remember the visions of the young people, acknowledge and respect. We mean the people who, I guess I meant the leadership inside Myanmar. And talking about Rohingyas justice and more and transitional justice, I think, as I said earlier, the National Unity Government also has to fully acknowledge what has happened to Rohingya and other ethnic communities. And that has to translate to the future, both transitional justice processes as well as political negotiation processes. And the accountability has to be integral part of it. At the same time, the political inclusions and political justice is also essential. And many international community, including just Phil has mentioned, think that reforming citizenship law or revising citizenship law will solve the issue, but it's not that simple. There are many people in Myanmar many ethnic communities in Myanmar who have full citizenship rights and considered as ethnic nationality, yet continue to face marginalizations, exclusions, and horrific crimes, violations against their lives. So that's continue to happen. Burmese politics is based on the politics, so identity politics. So it is crucial that Rohingya, a part of the processes in this genocidal processes, part of the injustice that we felt as community is that depriving us of our ethnic identity and our existence and belonging to our land. And that has to be addressed as a part of justice, as well as part of the solution to the identity politics in Myanmar. And by restoring and recognizing our identity, as well as from the beginning, including the Rohingya in the processes as we build a new country. I hope this answers well.
Great. Thank you very much, Warinu. Do you have any more questions? Yes, please. One more question, very fast. Your name, your master, and the question who you would like to ask to.
My name is Tatmadaw, and I'm from Thailand. I'm doing a master's from the School of Public Affairs in the Masters of European Affairs. My question is directed at Mr. Alex. I want to ask in terms of going beyond the overthrowing of the Tatmadaw, what will happen to the military sector after the overthrowing of the Tatmadaw? Will the ethnic military replace the military sector, or will there be maybe initiation of a new democratic military sector? Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Right now, there are many people thinking of drafting a new, if you will, a rule of governing the future military of Myanmar. That doesn't exist yet, but people are thinking of drafting this way in which it will be governed. So things like the military structure itself, who will be at the top of the military, how the military will function with the president, if there will be such a thing as a chief of staff or a secretary of defense, and who those people will be, bearing in mind, of course, the ethnic armed forces and how to take on a rotational basis of government, or if whether forms of elected or appointed positions will be picked. There's even considerations of rebuilding the entire military from scratch, and that's very obvious that the military can no longer exist in this current shape or form. And so a lot of people right now are thinking, since this military, since this group of men, since this group of people who are all graduates from one school, governed by one majority ethnic, is the main threat to our country, how do we change that? And so future militaries, can it look more inclusive, or can it look more inclusive in a way that perhaps even the Burmese Buddhist people are not really for? Would this include, would this military look something like Israel, where both men and women above the ages of 18 are obliged to serve 2 years for military service? Will this look a bit more like Korea and Singapore, where only men are again conscripted for a minimum of 2 years? Can there be optional opting out for non-armed service, but rather joining police and fire departments, for example, etc.? And who is our main enemy, or who is our main defense? Is it, and so right now, I say that because the military has seen ethnics as their main enemy. And in many cases, this continues on from the divide and rule aspects that the colonial system had put in place. But really, I would say that the future of this Myanmar military, first we have to think of overthrowing them. And we can't just, there is no formidable force that is big enough to face this military currently. The military in Myanmar counts for about 500,000 soldiers, give or take, for a country with a population of 55 million. And so that's about 1% of men who are in this, able-bodied men who are in this. Funnily enough, about 500,000 monks also exist. But again, they are not armed, and most of them tend to be nonviolent. And so the question here is, how can we split the military? How can we encourage more defections? How can we encourage people to join us? And so right now, just yesterday I saw a post that was offering military members from certain areas that the resistance were a bit more stronger in, to offer them cash incentives to defect. This is a very strong incentive that did not exist a few months ago, and nobody knew that this would be a possibility to be in. But so I'm not sure what will happen. What will this military leadership look like? I hope it's something that everybody agrees on and that is eventually good for the country. Because I hope that no religious groups are against, again, mandatory conscripting because of certain reasons, but eventually fall. We don't know. But what's for sure is that the military cannot exist in this. We have some baselines now, and those baselines are that, number one, military can no longer be in parliament. They cannot intervene in that. The constitution has to be drafted from the beginning, and all ethnic groups have to be at the table. There are other baselines also, that the leader of the military needs to be a civilian. That is, some non-debatable points are being considered. I hope that's clear.
Great. Thank you very much. It was a very interesting question, because coming from Thailand too, there was the comparison between the two governments. So that's very interesting, because we also discussed a little bit about that back in March when we first started the first discussion on Myanmar. So very interesting. Thank you very much to all our panelists. It was very insightful. We had a lot of different recommendations, some new advancement of technology, the use of advancement of technology, the arm embargo, the targeted sanctions, and then some revisited ideas, transitional justice, strategy, reviewing the strategy back in 2008, and then recognition of the national unity government, and member states should also use the laws that are actually provided by the United Nations. So this is very interesting. I hope it was also interesting for you and as insightful for you. And we look forward to also seeing you the next time, because this kind of discussion, we won't end it here. And we will try to continue as much as we can with different perspectives that we can, as much as we can. Okay? Thank you very much to everybody.